Let us now talk to Detective Superintendent Rick Stewart, who's lead officer for County Lines at the Metropolitan Police, because they've just conducted a massive operation in which over 200 people were arrested, over £1 million worth of drugs were seized, and this was all going on just in the last week or so, between the 27th of March and the 5th, the 27th of February and the 5th of March. Let's talk to Detective Super Rick now. Rick, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. Thanks
this is a great operation. I mean, we know that the drugs business has now sort of moved out into the shires, if you like. It's no longer just an inner city problem. Tell us a bit about this operation. How many officers you were involved with?
Yeah, well, as you say, Mike, I think it's County Lines is something which is which most people will have heard of these days, and it's a drug supply network model which moves from metropolitan cities like London across the country and focuses on targeting vulnerable people who are often exploited and involved, sadly, in serious violence. We've worked together over the last week with hundreds and hundreds of police officers across the country. The Met has worked with county forces across the UK, and also lots of partners to actually tackle the serious issue that County Lines brings and the threat it brings to our communities, Mike.
Yes, indeed. And what can you tell us about how you were able, without wishing to give anything away, I mean, how you were able to sort of follow the money and the drugs, if you like? You know, what's the chain? What does it look like? Where does it come from? How does it get into the country? And how is it then sort of distributed?
Yeah, well, what I can say is that we take a data-driven approach to tackle this type of drug supply. Most drug supply is no different to any kind of criminal market. They need to supply to a vast number of people and a vast number of users, and they often do so by using technology, including telecommunications networks, so mobile phones. The term County Lines itself comes from the fact that that's the mobile phone which supplies the drugs, and we actually focus on using that data to identify those people who are responsible for this drug supply model. And we are very pleased that, you know, since November 2019, we've arrested over 1,800 offenders, and our County Lines task force in London has charged 88% of those people with drug trafficking offences, which I think just gives you an idea of the quality of the methodology and the fact that we do charge the vast majority of people who are arrested.
And you've seized 35.9 kilograms of drugs, which seems an awful lot of drugs, £650,000 in cash, 51 weapons. I mean, there's a picture here of firearms, multiple knives, machetes, saws. I mean, it's terrifying, isn't it?
It's absolutely terrifying, and unfortunately that's a reality of this type of criminality. To give a bit of context to that, Mike, this financial year, of those people that we've arrested and charged for County Lines offending in London, over 80% of those have been previously arrested for violence-related offences, which demonstrates that the people we're arresting are intrinsically involved in serious violence.
Right. And is it a gang-run business, or does it tend to be smaller operations? Is it sort of, is there a kind of mastermind behind it all somewhere?
It's a criminal-run business. It's as simple as that. And gangs often are involved in criminality, as are organised crime networks. And ultimately, unfortunately, it's quite a lucrative business because these networks are preying on areas which are often socially and economically deprived, and they look at obviously pushing Class A drugs, which are highly addictive, onto those communities, which have a massive impact in terms of antisocial behaviour, burglary and robbery in those particular areas.
Right. And as far as the money that they make, I mean, is that laundered in some way? Where is that? Because we hear an awful lot about businesses that have been started up in some areas of Britain, which didn't have those types of businesses before. I'm talking about things like car washes, talking about things like the sort of barbers' shops that open up in towns which didn't seem to used to have them. Is there any connection to any of that?
I can't say that there's a clear causal link between those types of establishments. I think it's fair to say that a lot of those establishments, like car washers, are often linked to international human trafficking rather than domestic human trafficking, which is a County Lines related issue.
Right. Is there a connection with the drug business, though, is what I'm asking you?
Well, I think drugs is intrinsically linked to pretty much most aspects of crime and organised crime. So I think almost unquestionably, where there is money being laundered unlawfully, it will have some link to drug supply at some stage.
Yeah, and presumably it have some link to human trafficking as well.
Absolutely, and what we're obviously focusing on this year is to really crack down on the trafficking of children and young people on county lines. And the task force in London has rescued 28 young people across the UK from county lines this year alone, which is more children we've rescued on county lines than ever before.
Yeah, and are they from foreign countries or are they from here?
No, they're almost all British children who have been trafficked predominantly from London and have been rescued out in the counties on county lines, often in really terrible conditions where they've not been fed properly and the conditions are terrible, as you said. They're often given weapons like combat knives, which exposes them to significant risk and asked to hold and facilitate that drug supply, which puts them in such grave danger. And what I'm really pleased to say is that out of those 28 children that we have rescued, only one of those children has been prosecuted for county lines offending and drug supply, and the other 27 have been referred into support services to divert them away from criminality. So a key message is that we're not seeking to criminalise young people, we're seeking to actually, wherever possible, give them a route out of this cycle of exploitation.
And what about people who are living in parts of the country which perhaps they think have slightly changed recently? I mean, what can they be looking out for if they're worried that, you know, the drugs business is kind of moving in, if you like?
Well, unfortunately, drug supply and county lines is no different. It's often quite an overt sort of criminality, and people would see exchanges potentially taking place in the street once the problem becomes sort of escalated in that particular area. We would ask them to contact their local neighbourhood policing teams to inform them of that type of activity which is happening, to help us identify those hotspots. We'd ask them to give information to Crime Stoppers anonymously to help us to detect that issue and better identify those networks so that we can dismantle them and hopefully make their communities better and safer.
Well, thanks very much indeed. Detective Superintendent Rick Stewart, Lead Officer for County Lines of the Metropolitan Police, saying that they've seized £1 million worth of drugs and cash, possibly even more than that. It's an incredible business, the drug business, because you just make more and more money. The more drugs you buy, the more money you make, and that's why so many people go into it. But you've heard there, frontline, human trafficking and drug dealing go hand in hand.